Hi, everyone. Happy Friday again. I don't know how we got here, but yet we are here at the end of the week. I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement at Efficiency Canada. I'm located in Ottawa, which is also the unceded territories of our Algonquin Nation. Welcome to another Friday Discovery session with Efficiency Canada and friends. Before we get started, just a reminder to everyone that our guest speaker will present for approximately 20 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I can also unmute you if you raise your hand to ask your own question. So without further ado, I am pleased to welcome today's guest, James Russell, Product Management Director at CLEAResult, to discuss a topic that surprisingly we have not touched on during our Discovery series, and that is addressing the charging infrastructure to enable adoption of efficient electric vehicles. Welcome, James.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. So yes, I will be speaking today about addressing the need for charging infrastructure to enable the adoption of efficient electric vehicles. I should say first that I'm James Russell, the Director of Transportation Electrification at CLEAResult. If you're not familiar with CLEAResult, we're a company of about 2,500 energy professionals spread across the US and Canada. And we run programs that help change the way people use energy. We're doing everything from designing those programs to screwing in light bulbs and everything in between. So I'm responsible for the portfolio of those programs that focuses on helping people adopt electric vehicles. So what I am going to cover in this presentation is just kind of setting the stage where we are today in terms of EV adoption. And then what customer needs are out there that programs can, and in many cases, I think should be attempting to address, and the sort of program services available to meet those needs. Then what are some of the common program models, and what specific challenges are they addressing around charging infrastructure today? And then we'll wrap up and have plenty of time for questions, because that's the part that I like. All right, so where are we today? Well, I am here in California, and we've seen a lot of EV adoption. So in terms of new vehicle sales, electric vehicles are now capturing more than 8%. We just hit a pretty exciting milestone in California of more than 1 million vehicles, electric vehicles now on the roads here. And you could look at California within the US and Canada and say, well, that's quite an anomaly. And as someone who lives in California, I can say there are a lot of anomalies here. But really, if you look at what the automakers are doing, at what the national targets have been set, in the US and Canada with a mandatory target for electric vehicle sales share, there's increasingly signs that this is not an anomaly here in California. This is more like looking into the future. And certainly it's not just California either. I mean, China and Europe have really been leading the way in EV adoptions, both of those markets having more than 1 million new electric vehicles annually at this point. So no matter which kind of forecasting agency you subscribe to, most are now seeing large growth ahead in their forecast for electric vehicle sales. And what's shown in the graph is one from the International Energy Agency, which I particularly like because they talk about it in terms of, well, if we were to do nothing from the policy and program standpoint, then yes, EVs would grow, EV adoption would grow, but we may want them to grow faster. And if we do that, if we adopt those proactive policies and programs, then we can really accelerate that adoption. So why would we want to do that? I mean, usually I'm preaching to the choir here, and I assume that's largely the case here. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but when it comes to electric vehicles, whether you're coming at it from, your priorities are people, your priorities are the planet, or your priorities are the power system, there's a lot of reasons to have programs to support EV adoption. And I usually break those down into sort of the benefits that can be gained, the requirements that an organization may have, or the challenges that need to be confronted. So a large part of my job is talking to local governments and businesses across the US and Canada about what their sort of intent is on programs. And out of those conversations, this is sort of a word cloud of some of the themes that most often come up. In terms of gaining benefits, it can be cost savings from fuel, from petroleum fuel cost reductions, to certainly for a lot of our utility clients, it's a big part of programs is about increasing customer satisfaction. Within the utilities, there are strong needs for safety and reliability focus. That's kind of core business stuff. So when you think about EV adoption, it's going to have a significant impact on the grid, and programs can help get ahead of that. And then certainly in the area of challenges, it has come to light quite painfully, really, that early programs have, and early EV adoption really has skewed more towards the wealthy end of the household spectrum, and that this needs to be a solution for everyone, and therefore programs increasingly are focusing on how can we ensure equitable access to vehicles and the charging to enable the adoption of those vehicles. So that's kind of the from the sort of program initiator and administrator perspective, why might you want to run an EV adoption program? But then you start to think about the audience that the program needs to serve. And there are a variety of surveys that have been done about what are kind of common barriers to EV adoption. For the consumers, Consumer Reports does a good survey. For fleet managers, the Rocky Mountain Institute just came out with a great report that surveyed many fleet managers. And so looking across those different audiences, you obviously have to think about who your program is going to serve and what the specific needs of that audience are. So, there are common needs of, needing to understand, have knowledge about EVs, mostly, upfront cost of the vehicle is a barrier, and range is a common barrier. But within the different segments, those who might be considering purchasing an EV, that upfront cost reduction is a key target of many programs. And then having confidence that they'll be able to find charging both at home and when they're out in the world is an important issue to tackle. And moving into people who are already owners, they may still need help getting their charging set up, or they need help steering their charging towards lower cost times, or towards times when the grid is using cleaner renewable sources of electricity. So I won't read through all of these, but it's just important to keep in mind and have this as kind of the center of your program design, is thinking about who you're going to serve and what their exact needs are. And then you can start thinking about what program services you put to those. And these are fairly generic. Many implementers like CLEAResult, or utilities and government agencies themselves put together these services for a variety of programs, but often includes marketing, education, outreach to get to the target audience and help them understand why they would want to consider adopting an EV, manage vendors and contractors to ensure that they are qualified and prepared with training to, in this case, install the electric vehicle charger, standing up platforms to support these programs. And then there's a lot around technical assistance, and I'll say more about that in a minute. Many programs are providing financial incentives. Certainly, I think one of the biggest ones in Canada is the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which has allocated quite a bit of funding over 5 years for electric vehicle charging adoption. It's an important start, but there's probably much more that's going to be needed. And then with chargers, one of the great things about the chargers that are getting deployed today is they're producing a lot of data about how people are charging their vehicles, and that we can use that to understand potential impacts on the grid and use that to plan future programs that might ultimately want to influence the time of use that people are charging, and even actively manage the time of use that people are charging. So there's a lot of tools in the sort of program administrator, program implementer toolbox that we can use to address some of those potential EV adopter challenges, to ultimately get the kind of benefits or address the market challenges. So when you put those together, these are some of the common program models that we're seeing in the market today. There's programs that are focused on helping people, reduce that first cost and have confidence in making perhaps their first electric vehicle purchase. I will focus quite a bit more on the home and shared charging programs, helping people get the EV charger installed at their home or maybe their place of business or in a public place. And then there's programs that are focused on fleet managers who have kind of both an EV owner and a site host of electric vehicle charging, so needing kind of a holistic support in terms of both the vehicle side, total cost of ownership analysis, and the charging infrastructure side. And then ultimately, a lot of these, I think, end up in some sort of managed charging program where you are, as I said, shaping that time of use of charging. So I wanted to focus today mainly on the home charging and shared charging. I think that is where programs particularly have a role to play in making these infrastructure investments. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk lately, particularly in the US over the last few weeks, about infrastructure investments. So there will be a lot of investments made in shared charging infrastructure, and homeowners are also investing a lot in their home charging. But before we go into exactly those programs, this is something I think that for the next few years, many of you will see a slide like this many times over and over again, and some of you probably already have. So apologies for this repeat for those of you, but just your basic charging levels here. Level 1 charging is your standard 120, 110, 120 volt outlet. That works, but it's a pretty slow way to charge. You can, overnight in 8 hours, get about 40 miles per day, which is basically what a lot of people drive in their daily driving. So that can work, but a lot of people will choose to use level 2 charging, and that's at least twice as fast. You can get that same charge in 2 hours, or if you take a long trip and you need to kind of fill up the tank, so to speak, you can do that in more like 6 to 8 hours. And then DC fast charging, that's kind of your out and about charging. 50 kilowatt models were initially commonly being deployed, but now I think it's rare that anything less than 100 kilowatts is being deployed in public fast charging. And really the intent there is to get the charge that you need in under an hour, or you can get, in this example, your 40 miles in about a quarter of an hour. That's your basics. So when we think about programs that are helping people activate charging at home, usually the conversation is starting with somebody thinking about the vehicle itself, because, why not? Vehicles are exciting, and that's been the great thing over the last few years, that a lot of really exciting electric vehicles have started coming to market, which are catching people's attention. And so a program can begin by simply encouraging people that, yes, that is, an exciting vehicle. Please do consider that choice. It is not complicated to charge that vehicle. You can plug it into your home outlet. So just helping people feel good about making that choice. But a recent study out of UC Davis has shown that some people get an EV and then they next go back to an internal combustion vehicle, and trying to kind of untangle why people do that. And this was one of their findings, that a lot of people who discontinued use of EVs did not or relative to those who continued, did not have a level 2 charger. So that lack of a level 2 charger at home, or certainly a lack of access to any charging at home in some cases, some of the multifamily dwellers who initially purchased an EV and found, using only public charging was very difficult, or those who, got the EV charger into their garage and used their 120 volt outlet, but found that was pretty slow. Those seem to have been kind of reasons for dissatisfaction with the EV ownership experience. So, helping people move beyond that 120 volt charging experience to adopt a level 2 charger can kind of avoid some of that backsliding, we believe. But it may not be all that complicated. I mean, you may need to get an EVSE or electric vehicle supply equipment installed, or you may just need an outlet. Some vehicles, will come with an adapter. Tesla is known for this, for coming with an adapter that you can simply use the onboard cord, the cord set that comes with the vehicle with an adapter and plug it into a 240 volt outlet. But certainly for, convenience, it's nice to have a level 2 EVSE in the garage that you don't have to unplug and take with you. So that's a good option for many customers, and programs can help them get that installed with incentives to reduce the cost or technical support to figure out what they need to do. And that's more this example because it's not obvious to many customers how they should go about doing this. So a program, for example, can provide technical assistance to help a customer understand whether their existing panel and electrical capacity is adequate for the job, or whether they're going to need to upgrade that. And even at a very fundamental level from the program side perspective, just knowing, where people are adopting vehicles and where they're installing level 2 charging, even if they don't need a meter upgrade, can obviously be important from a utility perspective, because if you get a few households doing this and starting to charge their electric vehicles simultaneously, you may start having problems on the distribution grid that from the reliability and safety perspective, you would certainly like to avoid. So helping people figure out how to do those upgrades, and then once they're doing those upgrades, then thinking about how and really when they're charging. Because if you look at kind of this average household demand profile, and I apologize that it's probably too small for you to read the numbers here, but basically if a household that has some HVAC, some lighting, some other equipment loads, water heating, maybe using around the peak 3 or 4 kilowatt hours, but then you go and add an EV charger on top of that, and maybe it's another 6 or 7 kilowatts. If that happens to, coincide with the peak, which it very easily can if people are going to work, assuming that starts happening again, and then come home and just plug their vehicle in and start charging. A lot of that is going to be coincident peak load. And if the customer is on a time of use rate, that will be very expensive. And regardless of whether they're on the time of use rate, that is something that from the grid and energy supply cost perspective, we would like to avoid. So it's really important point to start educating customers as they're adopting level 2 charging about the benefits of charging off peak. And ultimately to, I think, share a glimpse of the kind of bigger picture that, if everybody charges on peak and we don't have any control or management or attention to that, it becomes very costly, and it really diminishes the benefits that most people are attempting to achieve with this adoption of electric vehicles. If we were to, it is not unreasonable to think that if we did not do anything to control the peak charging, we could be increasing the peak in areas, as much as 30% or more. And that would be quite costly, and would in many cases involve using dirtier peaker plants. So we both lose the cost benefits and some of the environmental benefits. So I don't think everybody who adopts an EV needs to understand all of that. It may be, it may be the desire to reduce emissions. It may be, that they do care about the reducing the cost to everyone, or it may be that they just, want to get an incentive for doing their charging off peak. But whatever motivation you can tap into, it's kind of the transition from getting level 2 charging installed is making sure they see the path to having that charging be connected with the overall objective of cost savings and emission reductions, so there can later be interventions that help shift and control that time of use. So that's really mostly on the single family side, and that's where most EV adoption has been thus far. But there is a lot of work to be done on the multifamily side. There was a recent paper came out from the National Renewable Energy Lab, which indicated that, relatively, as we start to get into higher penetrations of electric vehicle ownership, say 50% or more, you start to see a lot of the population struggling with access to EV charging. And certainly that is the case in the multifamily segment. In some urban areas, you'll have as much as 60% of the population living in multifamily. So if they can't get access to charging, we're going to have a big problem meeting some of those goals we have for EV adoption. And, importantly, this is one of those areas where equity comes in very strongly. If we want this to be a solution for everyone to both, participate in solving some of the big energy challenges we have today, but also to derive those direct benefits as the electric vehicle owner who gets a lot of the, operational cost savings benefit from the programs, then we really need to focus on solving multifamily access, because that is where a lot of lower income households and people of color reside. So this is a very important area, and yet it's one which is, for anyone who's been implementing any program from energy efficiency to electric vehicle charging, it's obviously a difficult segment to serve with many barriers. I won't read through them all, but the famous tenant and owner split incentive is a big one, and very impactful in the EV charging space, where the ownership needs to invest to get the infrastructure there, and yet the driver is going to see a lot of the cost savings benefits. So how can we address that? And then on many of these tie to the electrical infrastructure of the building. We see a lot of properties that, if you do anything to touch the electrical system, it's so out of date and in such poor condition that you're going to have to do a major upgrade, or perhaps the electrical service is inadequate to support a great deal of coincident EV charging. So you need to figure out how to address the infrastructure challenges. And as we've been working on this, providing technical support to a lot of multifamily properties, one of the questions that came up again and again was, well, as we think about, the future and high penetration of EV adoption in the future, how much electrical capacity do we really need to charge all of those vehicles? And there's kind of two questions in that. I mean, there's how many people are going to adopt EVs, and then how many people need to charge them at the same time. There is potential to do power sharing, or what the National Electrical Code calls automated load management, across a number of chargers that can manage that load, but still, it's a bit tricky to figure out how much electrical capacity is required. So that's one that we did a deep dive on, and I'll share the answer to in a moment. But just to let you know that this is occurring in the context of a multifamily program, which begins with a lot of outreach and education to talk to multifamily owners and property managers to help them understand the benefits of participating and installing EV charging. Then there's a lot of data collection to understand the site conditions, calculate existing loads, determine how much capacity is available, come up with a layout for where they can put charging on the property, which can vary a lot depending upon whether it's shared parking or dedicated parking, and then getting them into actual installation through those qualified contractors and the permitting process, helping navigate that and get it installed, and ultimately paying a financial incentive. So it's within the context of that kind of customer journey that we are tackling this question of, well, how much charging capacity is appropriate? And so after having come up against this at many properties, we decided to take a very data-driven approach to figure out what was sort of the optimal amount of electrical capacity. So what we did was we took a bunch of census data, picked a few counties, some more urban, some rural, and we identified people who were commuters within that data and people who lived in multifamily. And then taking data about their commute distance, some assumptions about typical typical vehicle efficiency to convert those commute distances to total energy requirements. We then considered that if you took all of those multifamily commuters and put them in different combinations, how much would those people living together in a multifamily property need in terms of electrical capacity to successfully meet their daily charging needs? So we began by, we took 6.6 kilowatts and then we assigned groups of different sizes to that amount of power and gradually increased the group size to see, well, is the group still satisfied? Is the group still satisfied? Is the group still satisfied? As the group of people sharing that amount of electrical capacity got larger. And as you can see in the table at the bottom, at a size of 3 households per 6.6 kilowatts, you have 99% of households are able to meet their daily EV charging needs. And then as you increase to 4 commuters per that 6.6 kilowatts, you still have just shy of 95% satisfaction of daily charging needs. But if you go beyond that and you add 5 households in that same electrical capacity, you have a very large number of households, over 25%, who are no longer able to meet their daily charging needs. So our takeaway from this was that if you are really trying to work within electrical capacity constraints, which are very common in multifamily properties, then you can do a very good job by sharing the capacity of 6.6 kilowatts between 3 commuters. And you can do that with automated load management. So you can give everybody their own charger, but you can have those chargers, when they operate simultaneously, share that power. And then when they operate one by one, they get the full power. And that is the benefit of if somebody comes home, say in the middle of the afternoon, and they'll get a relatively quick charge. But if everybody is charging in the middle of the night, then everybody shares and sleeps through the night and wakes up with a vehicle that is charged to meet their daily needs. You can even go to 4 per household, 4 households per 6.6 kilowatts if you need it for the capacity constraint solution. And I think this is a really important implication for programs that are trying to enable access in this important segment. And it's also a useful insight, I think, to those of you who may be working on building codes. And that is certainly one of the most efficient ways we can be planning infrastructure for the future, is having new homes and new multifamily buildings have EV charging built in. And you may not need to provision 7 kilowatts for every driver in a multifamily property. This analysis would suggest that there is you could do a more moderate, maybe half that amount, and still ultimately meet everyone's needs very well. So that is both the high level and I think really in the weeds of one of the things that we found that was interesting through these programs. but this is, again, just to kind of summarize, there are a lot of benefits to be gained, challenges to be addressed by programs, and by all of us, I think, taking those on, we can help accelerate EV adoption and bring forward a lot of those benefits. And if we don't do that, it's going to take longer, and we will have issues of people adopting EVs and not being satisfied and going back. And so it's important, I think, to be proactive. And I'm happy to take any of your questions today, or you have my contact information here if you want to follow up with me on any of this. But thank you very much for the time, and I think we'll see if we do have any questions.
Yeah, there's quite a few questions here, so thanks so much for that, James. It was really insightful, and I definitely agree with the sentiment you gave about we need to have the infrastructure in place if we want to see EV adoption be successful and long term for sure. Again, there are two ways to ask questions. One, raise your hand and I can unmute. You can ask your own question. I know we have a lot of questions already in the Q&A box, so I'm going to get to the first one right now. The first one is from Nathan. James, can you speak to electricity demand charges limiting EV charging adoption?
Demand charges limiting EV adoption. So that is an issue, particularly for fast charging, and there's been a lot of focus on that, because if you have as I said, a 50 or 100 kilowatt fast charger out there that's sitting there not being used for 23 hours of the day, and then 1 hour of the day when people are really hitting that charger, it's 100 kilowatts. And if you have a demand charge structure, the utilization of that station is not bringing the station owner enough revenue to offset that high demand charge they get. So it's been a big problem for the fast charging station, public fast charging station, those who are trying to make this a successful business. And so there have been some good solutions that have emerged for this. Some temporary demand charge relief is a common one until we get to that point where these stations are more highly utilized, so the demand charge doesn't become such a dominant cost factor relative to the revenue that a public charging side will see. On the residential side, I haven't seen that being much of an issue. On the demand charges not being common. Commercial properties, I do think it is a very important part of what we educate site hosts on and help them. I mentioned automated load management, which is kind of consider your capacity, your real maximum capacity threshold from an electrical standpoint, but there's also managing the demand charge through similar EVSE functionality, and so it's important to both raise awareness to property owners, site hosts, that it could dramatically impact their costs. And in fact, we do a cost analysis that shows people what is their energy costs and their demand charge impact. And if the demand charge impact is high, then we would certainly recommend doing something to with the EVSE software to limit when that's going to be coincident with the other loads at the site.
Yeah, that's really important thing to think of that you wouldn't think of unless you have experience in it for sure. A question here from Andrew. So bidirectional chargers. So are there technical concerns, or is it simply a regulatory issue? So long term, is there an opportunity for grid operators to use connected EVs as distributed resource similar to demand response?
Yes. Yes to all of that. I think that there are technical issues, but those are quickly, I think, being addressed. I mean, I keep hearing about more bidirectional chargers being on the market, and the vehicle manufacturers becoming less concerned and kind of easing up on the sort of warranty concerns about using your vehicle in that way. And there have been some pilots that have been, I think, very impactful in showing this can work. Particularly pilots with school buses have been happening to show that yes, there's a value there. So I think the technical challenges are quickly being addressed. As is often the case, I think the regulatory changes are going to be the trickier ones that we will have to find our way past. But I do see a future where vehicles, I mean, not all vehicles, like fleets, school buses, there are some great use cases for doing this. I don't think every residential household has to have their vehicle tied in bidirectionally, but there's definitely some big impact areas that I think will emerge over the next couple of years.
A good question here from Joshua is, are all new EVSEs coming with smart control to have the option to charge off peak?
So I hesitate to say all, because it is really hard to keep track of everything that is coming to market. But I believe, pretty much all new vehicles are at least allowing you to schedule your charging. So that's one of the really simple things that everyone can be doing with a little bit of education, maybe a little bit of financial nudge. Schedule your charging off peak. Vehicles, controlling vehicle charging more actively through telematics is also, I think, increasingly widely available. There are different ways to go about getting that access to the vehicle. In some cases, there will be a cost to using the telematics in that way. And that cost may not, for the vehicle owner, they may not get more benefits from participating than from that cost of using their telematics in that way. So that's one thing to be aware of. But from a scheduling perspective, I think there's a lot you can do with that basic functionality, and many people do have that.
Are there any programs or jurisdictions that people should check out for as kind of like gold stars, gold standards, or like on the way to becoming a gold standard that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's I guess it would depend on what particular type of program you're interested in. There's like California in the US has been the hotbed of EV adoption. So there's a whole lot of programs going on here. But Massachusetts, they are deploying a very comprehensive managed charging program model there, and Connecticut is not far behind. I mean, I hate to leave anyone out, because there are so many people doing really creative and cool programs. Colorado, the Northwest, British Columbia, like I can't remember the name of the kind of association there, but there's some great things.
BC perhaps, or
BC
Hydro.
Yeah, so there's hotspots all over the place. If you have a particular kind of program model or one of those kind of benefit area interests that you're trying to reach, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll send you a list of some of the programs that I'm aware of that might be good examples.
Awesome. We also have a section on our provincial energy efficiency scorecard that was just released last month, because it's the 3rd. And there is a section on electric vehicles in there. So that's for Canadian followers or those interested in Canada. You can check that out to see how each province fares against each other as well. I do see, someone had their hand raised and I took too long to get to them. So there is another question here though. During these early days of EV adoption, the EV chargers are not widely regulated on their energy performance / efficiency, but it could be a great source to look at for energy savings. Has CLEAResult conducted studies on, 1, how big the gaps are in terms of efficiency among the chargers on the market, and 2, consumer awareness or demand for high efficiency, like Energy Star certified products, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we run lots of energy efficiency programs, and one of the common questions is, can we adopt an EV charger into an energy efficiency program under the existing rules of that program? And the answer is usually yes, but from a cost benefit standpoint, as measured in an energy efficiency program, it may not be a very cost effective measure. So I guess there, depending upon the rules, we're seeing savings for a residential charger from 40 kilowatt hours annually to 200 kilowatt hours annually for a level 2 Energy Star qualified charger. So there are savings to be had for adopting more efficient chargers. I think there's more value in the management of the time of use, way more. I mean, if you can do the program from that perspective, if you need to justify it from a cost effectiveness standpoint, that's huge. Because if you think of those, say 100 kilowatt hours a year, what is the value of that? Maybe it's $20. A study for California out of LBL, Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, early this year came up to an estimate of more than $100 per vehicle per year of electricity supply cost savings from being able to shift residential users. So, it's 5x the benefits from the load shifting opportunity than the energy efficiency opportunity. Not to say we should never lose our focus on the energy efficiency, both of the charger and of the vehicle itself. Think of the vehicle. It's now we were doing efficient refrigerators for a long time now. We don't want to suddenly start plugging in really inefficient vehicles. So, I'm happy there's an electric Hummer, but my feelings are mixed because a Hummer is still not an efficient vehicle. An electric one is better than a petroleum fired one, but we still need to keep our eye on efficiency across the board.
Well said. Well said. Know your audience for sure. So I'm just going to end there because it's I see the time. So thanks so much, James, and thanks for the great conversations. I know there are a few questions out there. So James's email is on the screen, or you can always email us and we can connect you with James if we didn't get to your question today. So thank you again for joining us. For next week, I'm pleased to share that our friends at the Behavioral Insights team are going to take us through a few of their case studies where their approach to behavior change has been applied to reduce energy consumption and shown some impressive results. So again, just like EVs, every week I say this, but always fascinating and insightful presentations we have here. Thanks again for joining us, James, and thanks to you and everyone out there who joined us today. See you next Friday, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.